You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Hello again, this is Annie Rose Malamet, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. I'm here today with Angelica Jade Bastién, and we're talking about the new Hellraiser. Exciting.
Yeah.
Angelica, I'm a huge fan of your criticism. I pretty much read like everything that you publish. And would you introduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you? What do you do? What are you about?
Yeah, sure. By day, I'm a bitchy, powerful film and television critic for New York magazine site Vulture. By night, I'm a BDSM loving motherfucker, which I think is due to Hellraiser. Like, honestly, I think the reason I'm a dom is because of Pinhead. And I want to thank Clive Barker for, creating such a character and, really affecting my mind as a child. Because I saw the first Hellraiser at 10 years old, and that kind of set the tone for certain things.
I love that. I mean, Hellraiser is also like a huge inspiration for me and my kink practice. And I recently, and just to plug for the listeners, you should be watching Queer for Fear on Shudder because I'm in it and I'm talking about Hellraiser. Yeah, so, and talking about Clive Barker as an out leather man, making all of this amazing kinky work. If you listen to this podcast, you know I'm a gigantic fan of Hellraiser, specifically the first one. I also really like the second one, and, the rest of them, maybe not so much.
Fall off a cliff. Yeah. It just goes,
yeah, exactly. Like the third one's like kind of fun, but it's not sexy.
Yeah.
And I think my biggest problem with the new one is I don't feel like it's very sexy. So
yeah. I think I wrote down specifically, I was like, there is some sex in this movie, but there's no eroticism. And the first two Hellraisers, even when it's just like certain characters interacting, there's like this erotic current between them, especially with the Julia Cotton character. Whenever she's doing anything, it's kind of like, oh, that's a bad bitch. Okay, that is a baddie.
Yeah.
Inspiring,
She's so
very
hot.
inspiring.
Yeah. And there's just like there's nothing really, I know we're like already getting into it, but there's nothing really to like grab onto here. Like there's no kind of Julia or Frank. And like even Frank, as someone who's like not even attracted to men, is so hot in the first movie. And we just don't. I think that's my biggest problem with it. But if in reading some of the things that Clive Barker and the director David Bruckner, who did The Night House, said, they really kind of wanted to move away from that in this new imagining. Clive Barker was a producer, but he was taken onto the project after it was already written and Bruckner was already directing. So he also approached this with the understanding that this was like a new vision. It was no longer really his vision. And I feel like that really shows.
Yeah, it does. There's a lot of decisions I actually want to get into about the mythology that I was like, oh, this actually makes the Cenobites a little less interesting to me.
Yeah, tell me. What were you feeling about that?
So like one aspect I always thought was really interesting from the first two movies is the idea that the Cenobites are basically going after people not just because they're like playing with this box. It's not just the box. It's because they desire something from these beings, right? The desire is a big part of it. The way they have the box in this one where if a person gets stabbed, the Cenobites are coming after their ass. I'm like, that brings them more into like almost mindless slasher territory rather than characters who had a level of autonomy and there was a desire within their decisions, even if we didn't, wholly understand them, because literally they're BDSM sex demons. You know what I mean? So I thought that decision, I see what they're trying to do with the mythology in this one, but I'm always of the mind with the mythology in film in general, but especially in horror films, less is more. Suggestion is more power than straight direction and dictation. So that was kind of disappointing. I mean, and I guess I really wanted to talk about with you what you thought about how they look, because I'm kind of torn on the designs of the Cenobites.
Yeah, I think that was, so I have here in my notes, like, what works for us, what doesn't work for us. And that was one of the things that worked for me. However, I feel like I might be clinging to anything in the movie that I liked to kind of, like make me enjoy watching it. I did like, the Cenobites, they're just not they're not gooey. This movie isn't gooey.
Yeah. No, it needs to be kind of gooey and grimy and nasty. And I think those aspects are important because everything that powers the first two Hellraisers is especially interested in the limits and disgust and desire wrapped up in a human body. And I feel like with the design of the Cenobites, like on a certain level, I thought, oh, this is visually interesting, when I can see it and the cinematography isn't fucking dog shit, which it is through most of the movie. It's very drab.
Yeah. It is. I'm sorry. It just is. Like, I literally couldn't see it. And I had all my lights out.
I know. I was like, okay, this is a good television. I am like in the right environment to watch this movie. But, like, what the fuck has happened to people behind the camera? Because I'm like, you watch, like, horror, like, sometimes, like, shitty-ass horror. Not even, just, like, B-level. This was on a shoestring budget. And it's, yes, there's a lot of scenes at night. But you can actually see what's going on. In this movie, it's like, oh, yeah, it's nighttime, so we can't have any lights, and any way of illuminating and playing with shadow. And I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? Because some of those Cenobite designs would look cooler if they were shot better. Like, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
And then also, I think I miss the BDSM and the leather aspect of it. I miss the, oh yeah, these are kinky bitches. Because the way they have them designed is more like a body exhibit. And like, it's almost like distorted autopsies in various modes of being completed, right? And there's some cool ideas. I really did like the Cenobite who wheezes, and like the heavy breathing. That was an interesting choice.
I think is her name.
I thought that was a cool idea. I think that's partially the problem though with this movie is there's a few cool ideas like wrapped into it, but they're not developed properly, and I don't think it does the baseline of what I think a new Hellraiser should do, and what even a good horror movie does, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with the Cenobite design. It was too clean for me a lot of the time.
Yeah, sterile even.
Yeah, sterile. I mean, Clive Barker and David Bruckner said that they wanted to move away from the BDSM look. They said a lot of, it's been done, like, we have to move it into a contemporary context. Clive Barker said, in thinking about black leather in particular, I felt that our conversations about BDSM have changed. That fetish culture is something that is very much, much more above board than it was in 87. Back then, we allowed some Cenobites, leather-clad Cenobites, to scare the hell out of some suburbanites that were afraid to look at themselves in some way. Nowadays, we're very much doing that. You're talking about a conversation that's high in consent and communication. You're seeing echoes of that creeping into fashion. addiction. I was joking that my mom reads 50 Shades. It's kind of everywhere in some way. So it's not relevant to what the Cenobites are in pursuit of experience. So I don't know if I actually agree with that. I think I misattributed that. I think that was David Bruckner, not Clive Barker. But
yeah, because that sounded dumb, and I don't believe Clive Barker sounds dumb.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think that kink is still extremely maligned, especially right now in this cultural moment.
Actual kink, please. Oh my God, people. Okay. I'm going to go on a little rant about this. What we're seeing with kink going quote unquote above board is basically wiping the sex from it. It's like draining it of the sex and the complication and the tactile nature of it. And I feel like actual kink and actual kink practitioners would know that no, it's not above board. People are very puritanical in our American culture, in the bedroom and outside of the bedroom, how they think about what they do in the bedroom, and what they actually do in there, you know? So I find that quote, if anything, it would be more interesting to like keep the BDSM aspects, update it, streamline it in a way that feels modern, and then also like use that as a way into talking about modern desire. Desire's not, I mean, the whole thrust of the movie is following Riley, this young woman and struggling drug addict with an addiction storyline I thought was cheap, to be honest.
I thought it was some Dare shit.
I was like, what is this? This girl just picked up these pills off the ground and she's like, and I'm like, what are you doing here?
I know. It's very like after school special idea of drug addiction, which really surprised me, to be honest. It felt very regressive, very kind of moralizing. David Bruckner and Clive Barker were saying in the interviews that I've read that that was what they felt brought it into like a modern context, because desire and sexuality isn't as repressed anymore. So there needs to. I'm like, what universe are you guys living in? Yeah.
Where? Maybe because I'm a queer Black woman that I know that our desires are repressed. We're not allowed to express desire. And so even to express desire in that way as someone who exists at the nexus point of my identities, like I think that's powerful and radical and could be really interesting territory. But it's like the problem is with the Riley character is, God damn, some of these actors in this movie cannot act, and they're like annoying, the characters.
I found them like, very annoying.
Like actually annoying, and I'm like, the dramatic aspects of it don't work, especially everything between Riley and her brother, who gets like, obviously, you know, the Cenobites end up getting him early on after she first starts playing with the configuration, and it's in a bathroom scene, and like you see some creepy stuff. Ooh, blood coming out of the drain. I haven't seen that before. Ooh, is that chains I hear? But then he's like killed off screen, and there's no, I think, real cathartic moment that really like cinches that story. And also, I didn't give a shit about them. So I was like, you guys are playing a losing hand right here.
There's too many characters I don't care about. That was also really difficult for me because Hellraiser, part of what is so powerful about the first movie and the novella it's based on, it's these three characters, and there is a chain of longing, right? I mean, especially in the novella when Kirsty is actually Larry's daughter. I mean, not daughter. She's a woman who has a crush on him, and they changed it to the daughter in the movie. But there's supposed to be this chain of longing where, like, Kirsty is trying to, you know, is got these daddy issues with her father, and then the father is longing for Julia, and then Julia is longing for Frank, and Frank is longing for something greater out there, some greater experience of pleasure. So these core cast of characters, and in the novella, Clive Barker also likens it to the seasons, right? Like one season changes into another, and it's like the previous season and clings to the last. You know, it's a very poetic, beautiful way that he writes it. And there's not this central, you know, symbolic cast of characters here. It felt like they tried to kind of shoehorn a queer couple into it. And
it's always the queer couples in movies like this are always boring as shit. I'm like, these people come across like they've never fucked in their lives.
Absolutely. There's this very boring, like, cis gay couple. And, you know, I feel like you were saying, Angelica, you could just update the kink elements. It doesn't have to be the way that kink was in 1987, but there's still so much there to talk about. Like, you could have a character that is extremely self-destructive in kink world, and it's even, you could even acknowledge the pandemic, and you know, this person is, you know, continuing to seek out these self-destructive, sexually charged things in the midst of this hell world that we live in where you can't touch each other. You know, like, there's so much rich stuff there. And I feel like the idea that addiction is something that brings it into the modern context is almost like a little retrograde even. I don't know. It felt, I'm like, it's not,
it's very shrug worthy. But, like, you know, I think what we're kind of getting into is just how characterization fails in this movie. I thought it especially failed with the Ronald Voight billionaire weirdo
Okay,
character.
was he supposed to be like Jeffrey Epstein or something?
This is the problem with his character. He's not a character. He's like an idea of one, which is a billionaire who does a lot of, like, outlandish things supposedly. But we don't really get to see, I know, like, ooh, what does he get his ass eaten? Like, I don't know. Like, are people taking a shit on him? Like, you're going to have to give me more.
Right.
But we don't really see him do anything outlandish. And he also doesn't have that energy. He doesn't really have, like, a real personality. So it's kind of hard to, like, really configure, okay, so what kind of billionaire exactly? Like, what, you know, what exactly was he doing that was so outside of bounds of polite society? And it's like, you know, it opens on, like, a party at his place that is used in a way to lure someone to use the Lamech configuration or whatever and get their asses killed. Boo-hoo, sucks for them. But, like, the dude, like, when he's walking in, he, like, passes a room where people are, I guess, fucking. But it's, like, looked boring. And it was, like, and I was just, like, the lighting was also, I was just, like, well, I can't really see what they're doing. It just looks like some girl is on some guy's lap. You're going to have to give me more. And I was just, like, this isn't, like, pushing any boundaries.
Dime store,
None.
eyes wide shut orgy.
Exactly. Which is, like, girl. Yeah. Stop.
Which is already a pretty boring orgy. So
I know. I was like, it just felt like really lazy and cheap in certain ways. And it's like, you know, I think, like, Jamie Clayton as this new Pinhead is, like, a cool, I really like the pearls at the end of the
I love that because that's in the novella, and they put it back, and they weren't they weren't able to have it in the original movie because you couldn't see it with the camera technology. So now it's pretty cool that they can put that back. I loved the pearl thing. I loved that the Cenobites were more feminine. Like,
I did like the feminine aspect.
Yeah.
If they made them femdoms, then I would be really into this movie, though.
Yes, fanning myself. Yeah, come on. Like, it's such a missed opportunity because it's hinting at it.
It's like, it's sniffing it out. Like, oh, we could really have some real interesting power dynamics. But I don't know. It just felt so lazy. And then, you know, one thing that really pissed me off, and I'm curious if this pissed you off, was, like, the way the mythology is working in this. You have like, you know, 6 different, like, configurations of the puzzle box. And with each configuration, you know, a knife comes out. If someone cuts their hand on it, suddenly the Cenobites are after their ass and they're like screwed. I thought it was so fucking stupid that she was able to stab one of the Cenobites with it, and then that, like, they get ripped apart. So then I was like, so they have that little autonomy? Because that's like, if I was Pinhead, I'd be like, yeah, girl, that's not going to work. We're not touching him. Yeah. He is a good friend. I don't know you, though. We're coming for you.
That honestly confused me. And it felt like, I guess they were trying to, you know, in Hellraiser, in the second one, the Cenobites, like, can kind of die, right? Like,
yeah.
They get killed by Dr. Chenard, but they'll come back. But but they can, like, sort of fake die. And I guess that this was sort of, you know, kind of going in the direction of that mythology with it. But I just didn't like it. Like, I was like, this isn't, first of all, I didn't like that they took away the idea of consent almost in this movie. And I think, you know, some of my patrons were sort of saying, oh, it's almost like there's more, you know, consent in it. But I didn't see it that way. I felt it was like, oh, you accidentally cut yourself on this thing and now you're being sacrificed. Whereas I find in the original the idea that you have to seek out this experience.
Yes.
And you have to want it to happen, to be so much more sexually charged and, like, interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And this idea, you know, that you could think that you want this thing, but you don't really know what it entails. And they try to get at that with the Ronald Voight character when he has that thing impaling him, where, you know, I didn't particularly understand that. I guess maybe I didn't understand it because I'm still trying to come at it from the idea that this is like a sex thing. And then it didn't feel very sexy.
And so if it's not, this is a good question though. So if it's not a sex thing with these Cenobites and with the thematic terrain of the film, is it a power thing? Like, you know, what is the driving, like,
good
thematic
force
of this movie? Is there one? Maybe not. Stay tuned. We'll see. I don't think so.
I mean, I guess what they were getting at was kind of this, which is also present in the original, is this kind of idea of, like, existential suffering. You know, and I understand what they were going for with the Riley character as an addict, you know, because addiction is suffering and pleasure in one. So I understood what they mean by that. I think it's not pushed far enough for me, where, like you said, it just ends up kind of feeling like a slasher. And too many characters. Like, I didn't need that many characters. I didn't care about them. I didn't particularly like the acting, I'm sorry to say. I think
it's not good.
Yeah, I enjoyed the Cenobites acting. I like Jamie Clayton. I didn't really care about Riley's, like, Russian EDM looking ass boyfriend. Like,
oh, he wasn't even cute. This is my problem. Okay, if these actors are not going to be good actors, the characterization is going to be shit, which is, you know, just as important, right? They need to be super hot. They need to be super hot. They need to be so fucking hot. They are not hot. They're not hot. They're like, oh, there's that dude. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there's that guy.
He was so annoying.
He was very annoying. And, you know, I hate to keep bringing it back. I know people always say, like, take the movie as it is, man. You know, I hate to keep bringing it back to the original, but how can you watch this without thinking of the original Hellraiser? And I think part of what I love about that movie so much is they're grown and sexy. Like, they're sexy adults. Like, I miss watching adults in movies.
I do too.
I mean,
I don't like them kids, and I don't want to watch these kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like really gobsmacked by how like not good the acting was, especially the Riley character when she's crying, especially crying, oh my brother, oh I'm having visions of my brother. It's like, okay girl, like figure it out. You're obviously being haunted by some demons. It's not drugs. Like come on, be quicker on this. Um yeah, and it's just like if people were hotter in the movie, you know, I still wouldn't like it, but maybe I'd give it a half extra star on Letterboxd or something. Um, I definitely think a problem with it, talking about the characterization and people not being hot enough, is just that watching this movie, if you had never seen the first two Hellraisers and you just watched this one, I bet someone would be like, why the fuck did they do this? Like, this doesn't, like, I don't think anyone will really, I don't know how people are seeing this, though. So maybe let me step back, because I am very high-minded and, like, pretentious sometimes when it comes to film.
I mean, you're in good company.
But also, am I pretentious if I'm talking about, ooh, this is, how horny Hellraiser is? I obviously, like the visceral aspect of film. I don't know, but it's just so disappointing because I'm like, I can't imagine someone watching this new one and being tempted to rewatch or not rewatch or see for the first time the first two, because there's not much here. But people are starving for good food in the film realm, so
Oof.
who knows?
It's true, and I try not to. I just think, I guess I want to hear from you, because this is something that I know that you've talked about in your writing. What makes something erotic? What makes something in a film erotic? And what is this lacking that makes it not erotic to you?
I think one of the most erotic things in life, as well as in film, is the tension between touching and not touching a person. Like that almost touching realm and then giving into that desire. So it's a mix of, longing and trepidation in the acting, the cinematography, like framing the body in a way that really delights in its pleasures and uses it as a vehicle for pleasure. Like one of the hottest things about the first Hellraiser is not even the fuck. I mean, there's some fucking. They be dirty. They be fucking. Oh,
really
Frank
hot sex scene. Yeah.
Oh Lord, they were having fun. I know. I watched that as a 10-year-old, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
like
rewind.
Your eyes buck out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god. But like Julie Cotton does this thing where she like puts her finger to Frank's lips and just like goes around his mouth, and then he will, and like when he's in I don't really have my flesh form, she even does that, and his tongue is out, and it's like, ooh, it's like the suggestion of a fuck, like a good like that moment. I was like, oh, the sex they had, like you don't even need, I mean, I will always take the sex scene, but you can tell how good it is just from that sort of moment. And I think you need a balance between those small moments of like fraught intimacy and then like the bigger moments of the actual fucking and fucking where people are sweating, where there is sweat on their bodies. Why are people not sweating in these modern sex scenes? Everything looks so sterile. It's just like, oh, humpity hump under some covers. Oh, okay. I turned around. Ooh, that was exciting. Yeah, girl. If that's all y'all doing when no wonder people love to say, that like meme where it's something like, I know sex is great, but, and then insert something really like,
I know. I'm always like, but what?
And I'm always like, I was like, oh, so y'all ain't really fucking, because sex is great. I will choose the sex over fresh laundry sheets.
Over most things. Yeah.
Yeah. I will really choose a good fuck. Yeah. Over most things, really. And so I'm like, I think culturally, America's in a very sexless flop era. And I think people don't even know how to interpret eroticism these days.
I completely agree with you. I think the sex scenes in this movie, first of all, you better show me some hot sex if you want me to buy that this woman is gonna do all of this shit for this guy and like go on a heist with him,
What
it
was that? I was like, okay. I was like, I get that they were trying to be like, oh, she does not make good decisions. You know, it's not just she's an addict. She's just someone who's like impulsive and doesn't make good decisions and whatever. But you need to thread that needle a little better in establishing everybody's personas and get a better actor. But the whole like setup, the heist, the finding stuff, and it turns out to all be a grand manipulation, is really boring. Like, it's not fun or interesting. I almost wish it was more straightforward in certain ways. You know, like, because when you think about the story from the first Hellraiser, I rewatched it in anticipation of this for Spooky Season 2. It's like, it fits the adage of a simple story well told. You understand who these people are, how they move through the world, their desires. It's set up very quickly, really, in the first one. But you understand who these people are. Also part of it is they're way better actors than the people in this movie. So they're able to establish things really well. But it's like, it's a simple story. Frank, poor Frank, able to bring himself back from that moment where he's reconstituting his body and his gross dripping. It's so
we
great.
don't get anything like that in this, which feels antithetical to the Hellraiser series. I mean, even the book is gooey. Like
you need juicy gooiness and kind of gross and slimy and it's straightforward with what people want, and you understand why they're going about things the way they are. In this new movie, I don't have such a sure sense of who these people are, and so a lot of their decision-making process starts to seem really dumb really early on. I do feel bad that they got pulled into hell dimensions and shit because this Riley girl was just like making bad decisions. Damn, that sucks. I'd be mad.
And that was like almost borderline triggering to me as like a survivor of addicts who've abused me. I was like, fuck this bitch. So
she's not good. She's not like, and then like the whole end note of, oh, she doesn't want anything from the Cenobites, so she is choosing a life of guilt and grief. And I was like, I think she'll be fine living like that instead of being in a hell dimension. Can you bring her to a hell dimension?
Right. It seems like she's been fine the whole time living with that. I don't know why it would change. I mean, and speaking of the gooiness of it, like with the Frank transformation scene, part of why the gooiness is so important in the first film is it's a stand-in for what we can't show, because sex, genitals, it's all gooey and sweaty and fluid based. Like,
it is lots of fluids.
It represents what we can't show, and having the fluids and viscera that we can see be something that's violent and abject, it almost brings us into this more high-minded realm of, Julia Kristeva, Powers of Horror, where because we cannot see the sexuality, we cannot see an actual like spread vagina on screen, but we can see a spread open stomach. It ties the eroticism and the violence together in a way that is very abject, and ties the sex drive and the death drive. So it transcends past something that, is not that I don't love B-grade horror just for horror's sake. Like, it's great, but, you got to do it well. But this isn't done particularly well, but it kind of brings it into this other realm where, there's more of like a existential bent to the sadomasochistic story. And with this, it just kind of felt like, I don't know, I mean, I'm incredibly biased because I really don't like most contemporary films that come out on streaming, but it just kind of suffered from a lot of that kind of contentification, sterile movie made for a streaming platform that, it's just not doing it for me. And now for a short break. Girls, Guts, and Giallo will be right back after this sponsored message. Where has all the sex in cinema gone? Well, I may not be able to help you there, but I do have something that can make you all gooey in just the right places, even if this movie doesn't. Whether you're playing by yourself or with a partner, Spectrum Boutique has everything you need to open your puzzle box. Spectrum Boutique is a sex toy shop that takes a no-nonsense, sex-positive approach to sex toys and sex education. They only carry sex toys that are made from body-friendly materials with anatomy and pleasure in mind. More important, in my opinion, and take a non-gendered approach to categorizing their sex toys. Spectrum Boutique carries everything from glow-in-the-dark dildos to fucking machines. Need something kind of scary to get your chains rattling this spooky season? Check out Spectrum's extensive BDSM section, and you can take a beating with peace of mind, because Spectrum's selection of toys and lube are innovative and body safe. There's even a filter that lets you sort toys by girth and length, so your eyes don't end up bigger than your hole. Unless you're up for that kind of challenge, in which case, call me. Sob and come in painful ecstasy while earning points towards discounts and free gifts. Because Spectrum have just launched their loyalty rewards program. That's right, you can get your own code from this podcast. Use code GIRLSGUTSGIALLO for 10% off your purchase at SpectrumBoutique.com. That's Spectrum, like the LGBTQ plus spectrum, boutique.com. And that's Girls Guts Giallo, just like the name of this podcast, for 10% off at SpectrumBoutique.com. And also follow them at Shop Spectrum Boutique on Instagram and Shop Spectrum at Twitter. You'll be glad you did. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I wrote down a note that actually I think I'd like to talk to you about is how the film, this new Hellraiser, seems to be going for something like super epic, way more epic than what the first one was going for, especially with how it resolved with Roland Voigt and, the weird mechanical piece in his body coming out and the blood, and he reconstitutes himself. It's like briefly like, damn, I'm all right. And then, gets a hook in his gut and strung up. And eventually at the end, you see how a Cenobite is made, basically. And his skin and the pearls and all that stuff. But it seemed like it was trying to be very grand in a way that didn't actually fit. Like with the whole, you will talk to God, which is, not exactly what you're expecting. But I don't think that worked. It loses an intimacy that's really interesting and that needs to be there, I think, for Hellraiser to work. Because that's what's powerful about Hellraiser, is this sort of stark intimacy instead of which is very different than, say, the anonymous vibe of, say, a Michael Myers or certain slasher villains. It's I think it's trying to do both too much and too little.
Yeah, and then ends up doing kind of nothing. And it's the first Hellraiser is a gothic family drama, it's extremely gothic. And I don't even mean in the subcultural sense. I mean in the literary sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The house as the site of the trauma, the family trauma, but not marketing concept of trauma like we have in 2022, but like this more sort of, gothic, what's lurking in the walls of this house. And the house becomes this cursed womb with Julia as this castrating mother figure and feeding her child, Frank, the blood of her victims, this perverted mother, this, depraved twisting of the family structure that's very compelling. And in this, it's kind of almost like MCU-ish. Not to be that guy, but it's like you said, it's trying to be really grand and epic in scale, and it loses a lot of that intimacy. I mean, the Cenobites aren't even really the quote unquote point in the first one. It's really the human drama at the center of the story. And in this one, they were telling us like, oh, the Cenobites are going to be a bigger part of this. I was excited to see what they did with that, but they just kind of made them slasher monsters. And
Yeah, they did, which is
yeah,
lacks imagination.
it didn't really do it for me. I mean, even though, like I said, Jamie Clayton was super hot in it, like you know, I'm here for her. I don't think she was utilized though.
No, she wasn't. Like, you have someone with that sort of energy and that sort of walk and that the way that she carries herself, they could have done so much more with how she's framed, shot, blocked in the film.
Yeah, and I mean, Clive Barker says these monsters come into our world daring us to believe in them. Most monsters beat you down until you do. The Cenobites seem to invite you into a private ritual, which you will like, whether you like it or not. That's a very different thing. It's an invitation. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with you, but I don't think that's in the new movie.
No, it's not. That sort of invitation, someone allured because there's a part of them that desires to be in, to use his words, this private ritual. That is not anything that's happening, especially with how the mythology with the box is set up in this, so that no matter what you do, if your hand is cut, the Cenobites are coming after you. It's like a homing beacon or something for them, which is a weird choice because it does take away the dynamics of consent and autonomy and intrigue to what the Cenobites are doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. That seems, what Clive Barker says seems to be in opposition with what actually happens in this film, because like we're talking about, you don't have a choice. Like, you get cut by this box and now you're being sacrificed to the Cenobites. So I mean, I think that the design of the box in this was really cool. I think what they did with it, like and it was an actual prop, like that wasn't all animation. Like the box will actually do that. And they were talking about, oh, there's like an actual real heaviness to it when you hold it, and like I think all of that is really cool. Yeah, but at the same time, I felt like it was a focus too much on the like nerdery of it that I think a lot of contemporary films suffer from.
Ooh, expand. I want to hear more on how contemporary films suffer from that.
Well, I joke on this podcast, I call it the backstory industrial complex, where like everything has to be examined at length, and it loses the mystique, and it's not as compelling to me personally anymore. Like, part of what was compelling to me in the first film about the lament configuration is it's just not really explained. Like, it just is, and it's not
Exactly.
it's not explained because the human mind cannot understand it. So there's no use in even explaining it really, because we can't understand it. So that to me is more compelling, where the Cenobites are like kind of these esoteric sadomasochists that just have a completely different idea of what pleasure and pain is than we do. Then like the mechanics of this box and the different levels of the configuration, it just felt very influenced by the way that nerd culture has kind of taken over contemporary horror, sci-fi, action films, like over explaining too much detail to things that I personally don't find very interesting, props or mythology, and just that's just not. And I understand like there's a place for that and people really really love that and that's their thing, but for me it was like the box was so carefully designed, and then like so many of the other things are like thrown to the wayside.
Yeah, I think that's like a really interesting point for a number of reasons. Because, yeah, the nerds have won. The nerds won. They all need to be shoved into a bunch of lockers and slapped in the face because what have they done to media? But also, I think there's like a misconsideration where it's like people think extreme detail, and especially an extremely detailed backstory, is automatically good world building.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, world building is. I mean, for example, the world building in this movie sucks. Like, it has no sense of place or geography.
Yeah,
really.
where are we also?
I literally was thinking that. I was like, where? I know there was that moment in the beginning that I think, like, mentioned somewhere, but I was like, but where are we now? Like, where are we? Who what is this? Where are we? I'm confused.
Exactly.
Because it
No
doesn't
sense
feel
of place.
like anything. Yeah, it feels so anonymous. Even the filmmaking does.
Yeah, there's not really like a stamp on it where you're like, this is David Bruckner. Like, you're not, you can't, this is what bothers me so much about the contemporary films, especially for streaming platforms, is there's no artist hand. Like with Hellraiser, with the first one, Clive Barker talked about like, oh, he was a neophyte. This was the first movie he made. He didn't really know what he was doing when he came onto set. There's so much of the artist's hand in it. There's so much of his personal sensibility, which makes it such a compelling film. And even the special effects artists that worked on the first one, like their hand, the practical effects, right? Which is really hard to get with computer generated effects. Not that that's not its own art, but it's just very difficult to see the artist's hand in it. And it's, yeah, like you said, like detail isn't good world building. Like I didn't know where we were. Even in the first Hellraiser, like it's filmed in England, but it's set in New York, which is really, really funny. But there's also, we're in New York, like where when Kirsty is walking around the city, like it's so gritty and like gross, and you really feel like you're there. And then when you're in the house, like it's such a musty gothic house, you really feel like invested in it. And for all of the talk in this, I read a few interviews with David Bruckner where he's talking about how the architecture of it, and I didn't, for all of the care that he said he put in it, I didn't particularly see that being highlighted. So
yeah,
it feels like a
depressing
waste
for him. It does, because it's this brings up a question. Did you like The Night House?
No.
Okay, I was like super mixed on it. Like I've softened on it, like in hindsight. So I'd be curious to rewatch it like this year.
I would be curious to rewatch it, yeah.
Because I definitely liked it a little better than this.
I liked it better than this movie. For sure.
Yeah, I thought it had some interesting ideas. I thought the ending was shit. I thought the ending was like kind of a cop out. I was like, no,
I was just gonna say it was lazy. Yeah.
I'm like, there's not another beat after this. It's just
right.
like, and they're like, no. But there's some cool little camera touches with how it plays with shadow, and you think you're seeing one thing and then it moves and you're like, oh no, that's a living thing. And like there's certain ideas in there visually that are more interesting than anything happening in this Hellraiser movie.
Yeah, the Night House comparison is interesting. I sort of like don't even really know how to talk about this because I don't want to sound like a reactionary. I know that this is like a big debate right now on Twitter of all places, but horrible place. But this this idea of like trauma in the modern horror movie. And, this is something that we can even get into a little bit because this film also does this, which is, for me, it feels cheap. I think all horror movies on some level are about trauma. I just, and that's, I don't have an issue with horror films exploring that at all. So that's not the issue. But it feels pandering to me. It feels like a cynical cash grab. And it feels like, there's this Yasmin Nair essay that she wrote a few years ago about Nanette called Your Trauma is Your Passport, where she kind of predicted this, where she's like, this is going to be what's the marketing now, like your trauma marketed back to you. And that's kind of how I felt about the addiction storyline in this, is I was like, it doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like it was made by people who struggle with this or know what this is like. And it just feels cheap. And I think that's the Night House also less so, but it struggled with that, with what I see in a lot of contemporary horror films, which is just like the trauma itself is the whole thing.
Yeah, and like, no, yeah, first of all, I agree on every level. Like, trauma is inherent to all horror. You can look at like something as different as Cat People to Society to Hellraiser to Invisible Man, old one, not this new, whatever the fuck that was. I did not like that new.
Hated that movie.
I fucking did not. And okay, this is mean, but there are so many men I know who are pieces of shit who liked it, and I was like, but that's you in there. Like,
doesn't
that's
that just
you.
kill you when that happens?
It happens so much lately
Constantly.
that I'm like, y'all, what are y'all in therapy for?
It's marketing now. It's not like sincere. Like, these people don't actually understand abuse. They're just like, no, they don't. Oh, we put it in the movie and we watched it and we liked it. We did a good job. And it's like, that's more insulting to me than not even exploring it at all. So
I know it is more insulting. It totally is, because it's also like this idea that, you deal with trauma and then it comes to define the entirety of your existence is bullshit also. Like, what the fuck? That's insulting.
Yeah, exactly. No, I really did not like The Invisible Man, but it feels like there's a lot of these movies now being made by men that are, marketing feminism back to us and completely missing the point. And with this, I'm like, did queer people make this movie? Like, were they involved?
Can we talk about that? Because I was like, it's okay. Two things. Let me preface this by saying, I think people confuse queer cinema with just, this is a movie that has gay people in it.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
That is not queer cinema, people. Like, do your research, look it up. New queer cinema was not just, there's gay people in here. Because it's literally also radically redefining how film works, right? And so I feel like the first Hellraiser has queer radical energy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even though there's no, like, quote unquote gay characters. It's a queer film.
And this new Hellraiser actually has gay characters, and there's not a hint of queerness in it at all.
No queer sensibility. And there's a trans woman playing the Hell Priest, and there's a gay couple. Also, huge missed opportunity to have a gay couple with absolutely no sadomasochistic elements to the relationship.
Yeah, wow. They just lay in bed reading like Lord Byron to each other.
I know.
What the fuck they were doing. I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Like, Hellraiser has a quote unquote straight relationship, even though I don't really think of it that way. I think of it as,
I don't either.
Yeah, I think of it as like a straight relationship as filtered through a gay man. I mean, Julia is a power dyke and Frank is a twink. So like, it's very queer. And in this, it's like queer for marketing. So it's, or just this idea, of sanitizing queerness by like, we don't have to make it part of the story. Like, queer people should just be in it as characters and it should just be organic, which I'm always like,
people like take certain aspects of film far too seriously. And I think this is maybe a little controversial to say, But this whole I need to see myself on screen like a one-to-one is like killing cinema. Like, what isn't the whole point of watching films to be transported in a way, to be brought outside of yourself, which I think there should be diversity in films because that's just more interesting. You have so many more interesting things you can do culturally, visually, sonically when you do diversify. But that doesn't inherently make a film a moral good or something. You know what I mean? Like, or make it interesting or entertaining at all. I think the way people look at film as a mirror for them in the world is very strange to me, because it's not like we expect that of like literature. We don't expect a book to completely mirror how we imagine the world, versus films, maybe because it's a visual medium that is put more upon it. I don't know. It's something I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot because it's interesting. I'm sure you probably feel similarly as somebody who's been like in queer feminist spaces forever. You know, it almost feels like weird to say, like, I don't necessarily want that, or that doesn't necessarily make it good. I completely agree with you. It's good to have a variety of human experiences just because that's more interesting. But then you also have to think about like who is getting to, just because like a straight white guy like puts a queer black person in a movie doesn't mean it's going to be interesting. Like, we need people to tell their own stories, and not just that, like get some freaks in there, some outsider artists, like people who are not pandering to a focus group, or, you know, let people keep in the weird stuff they put in their movies. And you know, it's like, I don't know, that's sort of, even not even to get into this, but that's sort of what made Blonde even more insulting for me, is because I'm like, this guy is allowed to do this, but everybody else gets put through the focus group meat grinder. Like, it's very, I really want queer people to make queer stuff. Like, a movie that I find really successful was like Knife Plus Heart. But
yeah,
but
that's a dope one.
Yeah, but that had like a soul, you know, like you could see the artist's hand. You could see that Jan Gonzalez, like, this was his vision, and it was very like, there wasn't a lot, it hadn't been put through like the contentification meat grinder. And with something like this, it just feels like, okay, we took like something Clive Barker, it felt like every other Hellraiser sequel, like, I'm sorry to say, even though I know he was more involved in it than he was in those.
Yeah, but really, how involved? You know, like, that's my thing. When these sort of legacy reimaginings happen, and then like the person who created them is like brought on like a little later into the process, I'm like, well, how much respect do they really have for Clive Barker and his work? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I also just feel like they should have just gotten like a weird kinky person to make this. I'm not really sure why David Bruckner was the choice.
This is my belief. The best cinema is created by perverts.
Yes.
Like, no joke. That I'm like not even kidding. I really do think the best cinema is created by outright perverted ass motherfuckers.
Yes.
And I love that because I'm also a pervert. There's nothing wrong with being a pervert.
Yeah, it's
as long as you believe in consent.
Medium. Yeah, it's a perfect medium for perverts, is voyeurism and exhibitionism. Like,
I know, it's so great. Like, give me Peeping Tom vibes. What a great movie.
I love that movie. Yeah.
It's so good. I haven't seen it in like since college. I should do a rewatch soon.
It's good for spooky season.
Been a long time since college. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and especially not just even cinema, but specifically horror, because perverts understand that the death drive and the sex drive is linked. And that makes for some extremely compelling horror, like Hellraiser. And, you know, Euro horror, I feel like in general, from like the 60s, 70s, completely operates from this vantage point of just like complete perverts making stuff that's about the relationship between violence and sex. So yeah, I'm not getting that from it. It's just not working
Yeah.
for me. I
Yeah.
also didn't like the Jeffrey Epstein-esque villain thing. I was like,
Yeah,
okay.
cuz it's not even really going there. If you're going to make him a piece of shit billionaire, then like where's the piece of shit aspects of him besides him like manipulating people to death into death? That's like there has to be more to it and beyond like little Google headlines that we were seeing when she was researching on it. I was like, is this all we're doing? Okay, y'all, this is lazy. I was like,
Did you
what?
did you like the Scary of 61st?
The what?
The Scary of 61st, the movie made by the Red Scare woman. The
No, I've never seen that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that is I'm unfortunately did like it, even though I cannot stand Red Scare, but I mean that you can tell that though that Dasha, the woman who made it, is understands this. And I was talking about this with my girlfriend, like something that makes the Scary of 61st really compelling is that it understands that women are partly obsessed with this Jeffrey Epstein true crime thing because of there's a sexual tension there. So of like horror and like the people who worship serial killers, like the women who worship serial killers in like a sexual way. And she understood that, and it becomes like a very, I mean, it's also very interesting because the film recalls and directly references Eyes Wide Shut, which also talks about the kind of gothic goings on of the rich perverts. So it plays with that, and that's part of why it's successful. Whereas this film doesn't it hints at sex, but it doesn't understand the erotic, like you're saying. It doesn't understand uncomfortable sexual tension. I mean, in Hellraiser, Clive Barker said about the sex scene between Julia and Frank, he says in the novella that it had all the elements of a rape except the consent. And that is compelling, this idea of like, we want something we can't even achieve because it would be traumatic or morally wrong. This tension between like, what can we get and what can we not get? What are we never gonna, this pleasure that we're always reaching towards that we can't ever really achieve, And that is like the essence of what I find so like intellectually interesting about King that is not
Definitely.
there at all in this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. When are we going to have kink and perversion and eroticism in American cinema again? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's been since the erotic thriller, and I know that that's something you've talked about too, and
I love erotic thrillers.
Me
R.I.P.
too.
to erotic thrillers.
I know, and they keep teasing us where they're like Deep Water, like the Ben Affleck
Oh,
Ana de Armas
fuck
movie.
that movie.
I know,
Oh
I
my
hated it.
God. I watched that movie like, well, maybe. And I was like, I don't find Ben Affleck sexy. But I also didn't find necessarily Michael Douglas sexy, but I could find the situations.
Yes.
Maybe he found himself in sexy. Deepwater was dead on arrival for me. Just a very deadened, flat film. And this is mean, and you can totally cut this. But Ana de Armas. Okay. I know people think she's the hottest shit. But I think people are confusing like finding someone hot with them actually being a good actor. Because I don't actually think she's interesting as an actor. She's fine. She's serviceable. But like in terms of actual strong acting, I think like, I wrote about her performance in Blonde because I was losing my mind at people saying, "Oh wow, she's uncannily like Marilyn Monroe."
I didn't agree
and I was like,
with them at all.
Have you ever watched Marilyn Monroe in a movie? Because
I mean, no, they haven't.
they haven't.
Yeah,
This is the thing.
That's what it
Spoiler
is.
alert, a lot of these critics do not watch as many movies as you think they do.
No.
And I'll just say that. Oh, I have a question for you that maybe this is like good for like, getting towards wrapping up. Were you ever scared during this movie? Because I wasn't scared.
No.
Like, or even titillated or
I was bored,
slightly.
honestly, Angelica.
I was so bored.
Like, my
I kept
girlfriend
pausing.
and I were like, ugh. Yeah. Yeah, I kept pausing.
Like,
too.
how much longer?
Yeah.
How much longer?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, I have an hour? I wasn't scared, titillated, turned on, curious. None of the things necessary for watching a horror film, let alone a Hellraiser film.
Exactly. Like, if a horror film, of course it doesn't have to like scare me, like jump scare me, but if it doesn't seep into the nooks and crannies of my psyche in some way, I don't really see the point. Like, that's, it's supposed to at least, tug at me and, like you said, like be a little titillating. So I don't know. I think that's a good place to end with this. I feel like there's not much more to say. It's just kind of a boring movie.
There isn't.
Yeah.
It is boring. Don't watch it. Do something better with your time, audience.
Angelica, tell me where people can find you on social media.
So if you want to find me on social media, it's just my first and last name on Twitter, Angelica Bastién. I tweet too much. Do not try to follow me on Instagram. That account is private for a reason. I don't know y'all. Do not try to follow me. Thank you. And yeah, you can find my writing at Vulture and in the pages of New York Magazine, amongst some other places, but that's where I have my job and get my health insurance.
And I will be linking to Angelica in the show notes, so check that out as well. And, if you follow me on Twitter, I will tag her when this episode comes out, and you'll be able to find her Twitter. Her Twitter is an oasis for me. I mean, I also tweet too much, but I just love following you because I'm like, I agree with everything that you say. And I'm like, oh God, thank God someone's saying it. So go follow her, and you know where to find me. Girls Guts Giallo on Instagram, Girls Guts GLX on Twitter, because my other Twitter was deleted because these platforms are prudes. So follow me there, and I'll see you guys next time.